Today, I am joined by academic agent. He is an internet renaissance man and one of the most prolific and successful content producers on the dissident right. Welcome, AA.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm very happy that you've agreed to come on. I've been a fan of your work for a long time. I remember, I think it was a few years ago, I stumbled upon a video that you made about Sadiq Khan. And I've noticed recently there are many videos about Sadiq Khan on your channel because I was living in London and I was confused about what was going on in London. And it seemed to me that you had an explanatory framework that was pretty much up my alley. So what was your political journey? Because I feel like that was AA from a few years ago. You are now on in a different space. Like, what were the steps that you took to get where you are?
I mean, the first thing I'll say is that if anybody's like in the audience of my channel, it's a bit of a long running in joke in a way that whenever I needed a few more subs, I would make a Sadiq Khan video. So the Sadiq Khan was kind of like, it was almost like bait to get in like normie viewers, and obviously it worked because you came in from the Sadiq Khan, right? So
yeah, a disgruntled London viewer, but yes, indeed, relatively normie for sure.
But yeah, I mean, I would say that I think a lot of us have been on a journey. I would say that the reason I made a channel was because back in 2016, it really felt like the sky was falling in from a certain perspective. The Brexit vote had just happened. Now, a lot of people won't know that I voted Remain. I didn't vote Leave. I voted Remain in that. Now, my reasons for voting Remain were a bit cynical. I was in the process of selling my flat and buying a place, and I believe that the Brexit vote would adversely affect the price. So I voted Remain for that reason. But also I will admit I listened to a speech by David Cameron, who basically suggested that to maintain peace in Europe, that if we voted for Brexit, we'd have a war or whatever. And I just kind of last minute was persuaded by that, which is something that my wife has never forgiven me for, actually, because she also went along with that, and she was leading the other way, and she kind of liked Nigel Farage and that sort of stuff back then. And then of course later that same year the Trump thing happened, and one of the things that really shocked and alarmed me was the reaction to the Brexit vote in the UK, because it was like, okay, well, the vote has happened now. It doesn't matter which way you voted. You have to accept the result, right? You have to. And I had never seen the system and what we today would call the elites in the system have this kind of tantrum. It was just the level of emotion and the level of hysteria following that result, and hatred towards the people who voted Leave, was something that immediately made me think there's something wrong. There's something wrong going on here, and I better start paying closer attention. Now, before that, I wouldn't say that I was ever left wing or particularly liberal, but I was. How can I put this? I was just more invested in cultural things, like music, films, stuff like pro wrestling. I just pay attention to other things to the same sort of obsessive level that people have come to expect on my channel. But effectively, I was not very political in that sense. I did know a few things, though, politics wise. For example, I knew I hated The Guardian. Like I always hated that sort of virtue signaling left winger. And I knew that from a very early age. So when people talk about politics as a kind of disposition, a kind of it's something in your personality that pushes you to be one way or the other. In my heart of hearts, I was probably always, a man of the right. But to be honest, though, for a long time, there wasn't that much reason to be that checked in. It was just like, I mean, I remember joking with colleagues. I was like, oh, maybe one day we could see a cartoon election of like Boris Johnson in a top hat and a monocle against Jeremy Corbyn, like a flat cap and because it seemed so cartoonish from the point of view of where we had been, which was this kind of Blairite miasma. I always remember the 2010 election. We had Gordon Brown, Nick Clegg, and David Cameron, which was basically three flavors of Tony Blair. So this event in 2016 made me start, like, when I start to get interested in something, I never just get interested like a little bit. I want to know the full picture and go all in, all the way. So I started reading a lot. And one of the most influential books on my trajectory that I read at that time was The Abolition of Britain by Peter Hitchens, where he basically explained that like Tony Blair was not like I had just previously thought, well, Tony Blair, he's probably quite a sensible politician. He looks at what works and he's a pragmatist, and he was the sensible center of politics. And if you read this book by Hitchens, he turns that view on his head, and he's like, actually, no, Blair is a radical and almost a psychopath, right? And anybody who knows my channel will know I've always had this special interest in Tony Blair because the way Peter Hitchens describes it, Britain under Blair experienced something like the Chinese Cultural Revolution, only without the bloodshed. Like, you wouldn't know that this has happened, but it has happened. So everything that we thought that was British and normal and so on was quietly being, overturned by Blair. And in many ways, certainly in Britain, the culture is still catching up to all of those changes that Blair made at a time where most people like me weren't really paying attention, or there wasn't like this focus on politics during the Blair years. And he did a lot of things without any debate, without any, like, it was like he just announced, oh, I remember that one of the things in the news at that time was that Blair made a lot of decisions behind closed doors, and so that really was the me reading Peter Hitchens' Abolition of Britain was really the start of my true like journey to like be on the right of things properly, even if I had this kind of vague disposition before that. If I'm honest, it wasn't until that point. The other book that I read that really had a profound impact on me back then was The Vision of the Anointed by Thomas Sowell. I don't know if you're familiar with that book.
Yeah.
Where I mean, it's hard to explain to people, but there are so many things in growing up in Britain in the 90s and 2000s that you never think about. Okay, like, so for example, something like gun rights, like the right to bear arms. Up until that point, I'd never had any reason even to think about it. It was just common sense. Of course, you ban guns. It's just not a question. And in our politics and our media and so on, a question like that is it was almost treated like it's settled. This is just settled. There's no debate on that. It's just the received wisdom. And when I picked up Thomas Sowell, it was like, oh, this is the first time I have ever even come across the pro-gun argument. And he was presenting data, and he was presenting stats, and he was, and it was like, in many ways, it was like a knife through butter. It was like, holy shit, this guy's really talking to me, because he's a realist. He is talking, everything he says is a fact. And like, what's the liberal comeback on all of these points? So and the other thing that Sowell does in that book is that he gives this almost perfect portrait of who the left are. It remains to this day. People these days may cringe at somebody like Thomas Sowell because he's a bit libertarian and all the rest of it. But I still think that a lot of his books have value for his skewering of who the left are, how they think, how they argue, the pattern. He does this thing in the Vision Anointed where he talks about the patterns of the left, where they create a crisis, they come up with a solution, then the solution does the exact opposite of what they promise, and then after the fact they move the goalposts of what the goal was. All of these things remain useful, I think, for us to think about. And then, of course, you go through different stages. Like, well, you come to see the enormity of the problem. So one of the biggest things I think that a lot of people have realized now, it's 2022 now, but which was not clear back then to all but the people who came from the fringes, like the true far right or anything. Like, there are some people whose journey in was that way, but for most of us, it was just coming from just normie life and hadn't really been paying attention and so on. We always just thought, well, there are two parties. The Conservative Party is the right-wing party, and the Labour Party is the left-wing party. Well, the other thing that Peter Hitchens shows you is that actually the Conservatives have no interest in being conservative. They have not conserved anything, and they have done this consistently for hundreds of years. So when Peter Hitchens was like, the best thing that can happen for the country is for the Tory party to be destroyed, I started to realize, like, this whole system it's fake, right? I mentioned, like in wrestling, right? There's a good side and a bad side, and it's predetermined that eventually the baddie, the heel, will take a loss, because it's scripted. And I came to realize, well, hold on, politics is like the role of the Conservatives in the system is just to continually take losses, and we're meant to just cheer that on. And the media frames everything in that way, and that's how everybody is. That's just the de facto mode. So, after a while, people were like, "Well, you've got to read this good, Mencius Mollberg, for example." And he points a lot of this stuff out, the inner party and the outer party and the cathedral and all of that sort of stuff. I know, again, it's 2022 now, so a lot of people are like, well, Curtis Yarvin, he's a bit cringe and all of this. But I think it's easy to underestimate all of those things which seem so obvious to us now were not obvious back in 2017, 2018, or whenever, and to pretend otherwise is just, would just be lying. Like, I know people everybody likes to have this position where all of these things are obvious, but they're not obvious. You have, like, the process we've been all through is a peeling back of how the system works and coming to understand, like, the depth of the problem. And then, of course, it's like, well, what do you do about it? And I think, I have cycled through many different possible solutions. A lot of people, like, I did a lot of economics on my channel. A lot of people will know Academic Agent as a libertarian economics channel because I did a lot of Austrian economics. But that was also me looking for, like, well, what's the way out of this? And those guys had the free market as a solution. But since going through that and reading all the literature and going all the way, you come to realize that actually there's no aspect of this system that is free market. Like, the whole frame of capitalism versus socialism is just another lie. There is no there is no free market in the West, and there hasn't been for a very long time. Um, this is to say nothing about whether the Austrians are correct or not. That's a whole separate debate. But it just kind of shows you that there used to be people used to say things like go woke, go broke. The market, the free market will fix this. The sheer their strength in consumer power, the people power coming from at the consumer level is going to sort all this out. So don't worry, bro. But I came to see pretty quickly that is just not true. And it took I didn't come to that realization straight away, but by the time I was reading the Elite Theorists in 2018, through Moldbug and the kind of NRX crowd, I always thought, well, those guys are a good gateway into reading the stuff underneath. Like Moldbug is a gateway into Mosca, Pareto, Juvenal, Schmidt, all of these other thinkers who give you the kind of meat behind, his kind of synthesis, if you want. I came to see that the market is not going to fix this. I also came to see that. So okay, right. So if there's not if there's not going to be a solution from the market, could the solution come from politics? Right? Will it be as simple as taking over one of the parties, taking over the Tory party, or taking over the GOP as Donald Trump did, and we'll just do it through voting? Yeah, we'll vote them out, right? But then we came to see that the system, democracy, voting, none of these things are going to work either. There is no political solution. Now, again, I came to see that in 2018 in theory, through the Elite Theorists, through, if you follow the libertarian reading, you eventually reach Hans Hermann Hoppe and Democracy, the God That Failed. And you come to see that the entire democratic system is a sham, right? That Peter Hitchens thing of like the Tory party needs to be destroyed. It's not just that. The entire, they're not going to allow a dissident party to run, period. Okay. And then all of those things that people like me and Charlemagne and other like Aaron McIntyre and so on, we've been saying these things for, good number of years. And then the 2020 election happened in America, which, I don't know what you're allowed to say on this show, but let's just say there are question marks over that election, and the scale of it, and the blatant, just how blatant it was, and the entire system working in lockstep, basically to fortify an election in favor of this decrepit old man, Joe Biden, demonstrated in practice what we had been saying in theory. We actually got to see our theory of the system come to life. And I think seeing things in reality, not just written down in a book, is relevant as well. So I think 2020 basically closed off the possibility of voting our way out of this. It just showed us the extent to which this system is rigged, and is rigged against us. It's rigged against conservatives. It's rigged against people who do not want to sign up to the rainbow flag vision of the world. And then, since then, even more insane things have happened. The pandemic, the level of censorship around the pandemic, the extremity of the lockdowns, the making pariahs of people who do not want to get the vaccine, and the fucking Black Lives Matter in the middle of all of that. We're all locked down. now people can riot and loot things in the street, but it's all right because the experts have said that, like, somehow, if you're marching for social justice, it's not going to be a super spreader event. And then literally a week later, super spreader event with the anti-lockdown crowd. So we were seeing the system, all of these things that people like Schmidt or Paul Gottfried or Sam Francis talk about in theory. We were watching them come to life. We were watching the entire system weaponized, and the ratchet effect. We've gone from, first it's like neo Nazis like Andrew Anglin and Stormfront who get deplatformed. Then it's Alex Jones who's not allowed to have a bank account. Then or a YouTube channel or a Twitter account, or then it's like now then it ramps up again to the president of the USA, Donald Trump, is banned from Twitter, not allowed to have a presence. His speeches, now, don't forget, he was giving speeches as the president and they were being censored in real time on YouTube. They were pulling them down. He wasn't allowed to have a voice. They were trying to do the same thing to him. And he's still in this weird state where Donald Trump only exists on the internet in these weird statements that people like copy and paste, and now we've reached the absurd level to bring us back up to 2022, where it's the entire country of Russia that is getting the Alex Jones treatment. So, I mean, I think it's the insanity of the past few, like, we talk about a journey intellectually, but there's also been the journey of what's happened in the world. And they just come thick and fast. It's like we live in a permanent state of like shell shock and crisis, because the elites are like a kind of abuse, they're like a kind of abusive teacher or something, and we are just kind of permanently living in this like horrible psyop. I mean, I don't know about you. Did you ever see that film Sliding Doors like years ago? That there's a film called Sliding Doors where this woman has this like two paths in front, and whether she makes it into the sliding doors or not, all the rest of her life changes from that moment. Okay. And in one story, she's like, I think she's happy, and there's everything turns out great. And in the other story, it's like the bad ending, And it really feels to me like since that time, since the Brexit and Trump, it's like the entire world has stepped through those sliding doors, and we are in some bizarre, like, alternate reality that we're never waking up from. It is. I still sometimes wonder, like, we're never going to go back to the world that we knew in 2014. For better or for worse. So I don't know how does that accord with your journey? Like how many of those things do you recognize?
Quite a lot of them. Thomas Sowell was definitely a key ingredient. I read a lot of Peter Hitchens as well. Moldbug to me, yeah. Actually, Nick Land. Nick Land was the first thing I found that was completely disruptive, and because Nick Land probably refers to Moldbug every second paragraph, I had to see what Moldbug was about, and then I read Unqualified Reservations, and from then on, I looked at the Moldbug reading list, like you said. Burnham was really important to me.
Burnham,
Yeah, the Machiavellians, which I mean, to be honest, I haven't, after reading the Machiavellians 3 times and making sure I understood it all, I didn't go on to read Mosca and Pareto and all of that. I was like, okay, I think I got the gist of this. But it's, and that's why, I'm a viewer of all of these channels, like, the Distributist, Aaron McIntyre, and I rely on the kind work of all these wonderful YouTubers to summarize some of these works. So yeah, that's pretty much the direction I went in as well. And yeah, I was also fairly libertarian, fairly, I watched all of your videos on Austrian economics, and that was also kind of an important part of my education. So that was really helpful as well. Um, to me, it feels like all of that is perfectly correct in a vacuum on a paper napkin. They have the best math. It makes sense outside of the world of power, which is a world we actually live in. So power is the distortion field in which the math breaks down. So yeah, that's pretty much, yeah. I would say at least 50% on the money.
Yeah, I should have mentioned James Burnham's Machiavellians because, again, in my own journey, that was a profound. I mean, you said disruptive. That was like all the gears. Reading the Machiavellians was like all the gears come to a halt because Burnham and the elite theorists. But the way Burnham lays it out in Machiavellians, at the time, if you have any lingering liberal assumptions, basically, he basically just destroys them. Like over the course of one, like it's just like the biggest black pill. Like viewed from the point of view of like 2017, say, Burnham is just this giant, unconquerable black pill that you take, and it does have very profound consequences, I think, for your worldview afterwards. And I still, I've just released my course, Foundations of Politics, where I go through the elite theory in some detail, and people like increasingly accuse me of being like too black pilled or a nihilist and all this sort of stuff, but you have to face reality, the reality of power. And I have come to the view, for right or for wrong, that the only way out of this situation with these particular elites is either to overthrow them or for the system to collapse. And then we hope for a group led by us, essentially, to take over in the aftermath. When I say us, I don't mean me. I'm just a scholar, of course, not a political activist, but you know what I'm saying, right? People with our sorts of ideas. And of course, if you take Burnham and Robert Michel's and these sorts of people seriously, you know that the only path to power is through tight organization. There's no way of achieving power just by like riling up the masses. And I think that if the conservative right have got anything wrong, that's probably the biggest thing. This idea that um, do you remember everybody would take, oh, of course, there'll be a tipping point at some point. When enough people wake up, when enough people take the red pill, there'll be this critical moment where it will spill over. And as if by magic, suddenly the conservative majority will find themselves in power. But that's not how power works and never has. I mean, power is always wielded by a tightly organized minority group against a disorganized mass who they can pick off one by one by one by one. And until everybody, and I mean everybody on our side, gets that message and then works towards becoming a vanguard, almost like Leninist group, right? We just have no shot whatsoever in achieving power. And the truth is, unless you're kind of working towards an end like that, you might as well be watching this as a kind of dark entertainment. There's nothing else to it, really. Maybe this great if this is your entertainment, great. But if you're going to be serious, being part of something organized is the action that you can take, I suppose. Now the problem is that the system, the regime, if you want, is extremely adept at breaking up organized groups. They infiltrate them with feds. They, it paints a target on your back. They zero in on any organization whatsoever. You'll get hit pieces against you. You'll probably get police knocking at your door. So the challenge for us is to work towards this end, I suppose, without attracting all of that attention, to do it in a way that is underground enough, and possibly at first decentralized enough that it's not going to attract all of that. So like the worst, like we've seen the mistakes that have been made. For example, one of the things that we should never do, and I hope nobody listening to the show would ever do this anyway, is all dress up in uniforms and fly flags, and march in a place saying Jews will not replace us, for example. Fucking disaster, stupid. Why would you ever do that? I would much prefer to see coordinated and ruthless action taken against our enemies. Okay. I mean, I'll give you an example, right? In the UK, we have this thing called Hope Not Hate. Have you heard of that? Now, every year, they run a report on dissident people from the right, typically. And it runs all the way from like neo-Nazi siege groups, right? All the way to like James Delingpole and Spectator and things like that, okay? Now, wouldn't it be nice if Hope Not Hate was sued? Right? They put Ed Dutton in there, for example. They put Daughter of Albion in there, for example. They put James Delingpole in there. They even put like Sargon of Akkad in there, right? All of them are in there. Hope Not Hate now as extremists. They run these reports. Now, rather than just being sued for defamation once, why not have them face 40 or 50 lawsuits at the same time? This is the sort of organization, and don't target the group. Target the individual journalists who wrote those stories, the individual writers who wrote that. Did you ask permission to use my likeness? Okay. Is everything that you've said here true, or is it a defamation of my character? What does it mean to my business model for you to be putting me on this double page spread, and you look across there and there's this guy with a SWAT sticker on his face? Why are you associating me with these things? All of these things, like, they could deal with one. Could they deal with 50 is what I'm saying. Do they have unlimited resources in that way? Will the organization stand behind the individual writers when they're facing a massive civil lawsuit? Do you understand what I'm saying? This is how the left think. The left go after individuals. The left go for money. The left go through legal channels. And from what I can see, people on our side don't want to think like this, but they're going to have to think like this, especially because the opposition do not expect organized response. I mean, what that Hope Not Hate report is what I said. It's an organized minority picking off a mass one by one. They can pick on Delingpole on his own, or Sargon on his own, or Ed Dutton on his own, because they're powerless against the organization, right? But if we were organized enough to have a coordinated response that they don't see coming, okay, that sort of action could be powerful. Do you understand what I'm saying? And this is not, they can deal with mass protest. They can deal with, big YouTube channels, for example, or dissident speech. They can deal with all these things. I'm not sure if they faced that sort of organized resistance before, and it does have. I've seen it work in real life. There's a few cases I can't really get into, but I've seen what happens when these people are faced with, organized pushback. They don't expect it. What they're expecting everybody to do is to crumple. They expect everybody to crumple in front of their power. And when that doesn't happen, they start to fall apart because these people are cowards. They're cowards. In my view, it's that sort of thing that's going to happen. The problem is that the people with those sorts of skill sets are not typically the content creators. You know, we've got a lot of like people like me who are academic, or people who are, you know, people who like to discuss ideas, who are a lot of philosophers and things like this. But what we need is people with these like practical skills, like legal skills, uh, you know, accountants, money, this sort of stuff. And that will, like, in an ideal world, that would be the next phase. But I made a series of posts at the start of the year, Alex, where I said, in my view, the right just isn't serious. By which I mean, most people listening to this and most people who listen to me, they don't really, I mean, they're not going to do any of that stuff. Then they're not serious enough to kind of organize on that sort of level. Which is why I increasingly say that I'm just a scholar who makes suggestions, because the more I think about it, the more hopeless. You know, I'm prone to thinking that there's a kind of hopelessness around, because people on our side of things are more interested in taking pot shots at each other and arguing over like how many angels can dance, you know, on the head of a pin, rather than uniting in concerted, organized pressure in that sort of way.
Yeah, I have to agree with that because you know, just the amount of purity spiraling I've seen recently in the turf wars, and it also, in a way, is a good sign, because it feels like the pressure is increasing on this space because there's more attention paid to it. So you essentially have gatekeeping and purity spiraling because there's something to fight over, when it just was, you know, people talking in forums and things like that. It was just a different type of atmosphere. There wasn't that much pressure. But unfortunately, the negative side is that, you know, there is, it's very hard to be big tent in these spaces, because, you know, there's something wrong with you. So I probably have, you know, 200 opinions where I'm exactly spot on with, you know, most people, but then those five that we just don't disagree, we don't agree on, that means that I have to be, you know, exiled to the edges of the empire because I'm whatever, not part of their coalition, which is probably just like a group chat of five people. It's Yeah, it's very hard, and I think it's also partly because a lot of people in the space still deep down buy into the framing of the left, especially people coming from like the IDW central, you know, complex. Yeah, they're still very much, they won't venture into these parts, not because they're not capable of doing that, is because their moral core is still influenced by, you know, what you lovingly call the boomer truth regime, which is another thing I wanted to
Mm.
discuss with you. I mean, what is the boomer truth regime? Because I feel like this is an extremely useful concept, and it illuminates this veil that we have around us. And yeah, I use it all the time.
Yeah, so I mean, the boomer truth regime came about after World War II. Um, I would say that, I mean, its genesis is in the Nuremberg. Is it started in the Nuremberg trials, I suppose, but I don't think it fully cemented itself until the 1960s. Um, the 1960s was truly like the victory of boomer truth in our culture, and what it is that there's a moral paradigm. This concept of a truth regime, I've actually taken from Michel Foucault, who is a thinker from the left, but he has this useful concept that we live in a kind of epistemic bubble that we can't see outside of. So if you can imagine like a medieval man who believed in the great chain of being, his entire world was contained in that ideological system. He wasn't aware of points of view outside of that. In a way, he couldn't see outside of it. And the bubble that we live in is called the the boomer truth regime. And there are certain things that are never questioned within that. But the moral paradigm is essentially the ultimate evil are the Nazis, to put it bluntly, as embodied in Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler is the ultimate villain in all of history, the worst man ever to live. On the flip side, the ultimate good is something like individual self-expression, as embodied in 1960s counterculture and free love, and the revolution man, you know. And the problem with this moral paradigm, I am not suggesting, by the way, that the Nazis weren't bad. Okay, I'm not trying to like rehabilitate Hitler. That's. I mean, even if you wanted to, that's probably impossible. Okay, at this point, I mean, look at the war in Ukraine. Like, I mean, it's both sides accuse each other of being Nazis. You know, it's just, you know, there's no winning that one, I'm afraid. But this does have profound problems and consequences. Bronze Age Pervert has put this better than anyone that I can think of, when he says that in the hysterical reaction to fascism after World War II, the Western elites have done something like chopping off half of human nature. Because it's not just, to put it frankly, the Jewish question that is put out of bounds by this kind of reaction against the Nazis. It's any step at all that they may have had as part of their world vision, you know, things that were actually healthy and natural and normal to all other ages are now seen as a step towards fascism. Paul Gottfried is very good on this question, by the way. He has two books, Fascism, The Career of a Concept, and Antifascism, which was his latest book. And he shows how profoundly damaging this concept of the anti-fascism is. There's another guy called Thomas 777, who I think you've had on your show, who says that the correct way to think about our ideology isn't liberal. It's not liberalism. It is anti-fascism. And once you understand this, you start to see, well, now Antifa aren't these far left revolutionaries. They're the foot soldiers for the system. You know, Black Lives Matter were not this revolutionary group. They're literally what the system wants. And once you start to realize this has always been the case, especially in America since FDR, possibly even going back to Wilson, but definitely since FDR, right? That anti-fascism is at the core of their ideological worldview more than anything else. And here, fascism is an expansive term that comes to mean something like all tradition. Okay, so it's not fascism is not just like Mussolini or Mussolini and Hitler, or even Mussolini, Franco and Hitler. Fascism is just tradition, capital T tradition, and anything conservative whatsoever. This is why Thomas 777 says the right wing was banned after 1945. And once you start to understand these things, it starts to make sense why the post-war right became libertarian as opposed to conservative. Why, you know, the conservatives were reduced to just being this free market kind of, and even then it was a fake libertarianism, right? As the Mises a lot would tell you, it wasn't even Austrian economics free market. It was Chicago school, Chicago school kind of beltway libertarianism. Yeah, I think understanding the boomer truth regime and the terms of the boomer truth regime is the first step to actually freeing yourself from its worldview, and then taking, how can I put this, like, once you break free, because it's like a mental cage, it's like a prison. Once you break those bars open, you liberate your own conceptual horizon and allow yourself to think things that are unthinkable, that were previously unthinkable, right? And again, I'm not talking about like becoming a fascist or anything, but I am talking about things like, well, maybe individual self-expression isn't that great a thing. Um, maybe liberal values aren't all they're cracked up to be. Maybe democracy isn't all it's cracked up to be. Um, you know, maybe even being a Nazi is not the worst, not the absolute worst thing in the world that you can be. What about the traditional seven deadly sins of pride, lust, gluttony, greed, and so on? Because the more we think about Nazism as the ultimate evil, the more we forget about what actual evil is, as laid down by generations and centuries of thinkers and theologians. Aquinas and Augustine and all these people. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not. They hit on something that was essential to what it means to be human, that I think that we are losing sight of. Um, and I think the biggest takeaway from Boomer Truth Regime that I would want people to take away from this is to start to understand that we have lived in the exception. We have lived in this extreme, bizarre moment in history where all of the norms are turned on are inverted. The order has been turned upside down. Now, once upon a time, take somebody like Shakespeare. Shakespeare saw that disorder as the ultimate bad thing. When men start to think that they're women, and when women start to think that they're men. When the patriarchy is inverted, when peasants come to rule over kings, all of these things that were just taken for granted as a wisdom at earlier times in history. Now we're at a point where the politicians cannot even identify what a woman is. They're meant to be our leaders. They're meant to be the wise ones. Even the conception of a wise leader is something that is beyond our thinking. So the sooner that we can break the chains of that Boomer Truth regime, the sooner I hope we will be able to essentially just return to the norm of history, to return to just what is natural and normal and has been all throughout human affairs. And in a way, what I want is not even that revolutionary. Like, I mean, at this point, you know, at this point, I would settle for someone who is as sensible as like the average member of JFK's cabinet, right? And JFK was pretty liberal, right? But we're so far gone at this point that any movement towards normality would be welcome. So yeah.
Yeah, it's I unfortunately have to agree with you. I've kind of come to the same conclusion slowly by the same pretty much the same route. Um, so would you have any hope in a changing of the guard at elite level? Maybe not in a very explicit way, but from the very top, in a trickle down motion, because there are a few people in in higher corners that know these things. That they're starting to figure out these things, and there's also the reality of the theory of liberalism or whatever anti-fascism straining the infrastructure of the system. The fact that there will come a time where bridges can't be built, where wars cannot be won, where medicine will not function, where literally everything is going to slowly crumble. And like you said, it might lead to total collapse, or there might be some switch from people at the top realizing, okay, this is unsustainable. There might also be less status to be extracted from the fountains of status that reside on the left right now. So, do you see that as a possibility that things might switch up before for the bridges collapse?
Unfortunately, um, I feel like the war, the situation with Russia, has strengthened the regime. Now, this may seem paradoxical because, from a certain point of view, they're weakened, right? They're weak. Their standing in the world is weakened. It's obvious that their attempts to deplatform Russia are failing. We're going to have economic hardship coming soon because a lot of their sanctions are backfiring. So, from a certain point of view, and it looks like the US is going to cease to become is going to cease to be the world hegemon. That era is coming to an end. But our interest is them being our elites, is domestic, right? And at home, I feel like their situation has been greatly strengthened by this. One of the concepts I talk about a lot that people don't seem to grasp, that the system is very good at doing, especially in the UK. The Tory party in the UK are the absolute masters at it. But it happens in every country, and it happens in America as well. Is the system is very good at containment, at being able to take your kind of right wing energies and redirect them to something new. And I'm afraid to say that the conflict in Ukraine and the media operation around that has actually done that. I mean, I have been shocked. I've been beside. I mean, we talk about blackpilling. I mean, I would say one of the most blackpilling experiences for me in the past. What is it, 6-7 years now? Has been watching people on our side just fall in line with the media narrative on Ukraine. Literally 2 weeks after the truckers thing in Canada, the same people who supported the truckers are now calling for nuclear war, and we must stop Putla. This to me has shown me like how far away we are in men. I don't want to be like a doomsmonger, but I feel like their control has been consolidated. Okay, now that is not to say that the path ahead is not without risks for them, because the true test is going to be if this economic pain that we're about to experience is severe. It could destabilize things to present an opportunity for them to fall and to be replaced. Okay, but I would first of all voice caution. I said recently on my show on Popular Opinions that I think that all of us should lie low for a little while, because the system is more insane and more unpredictable than I've seen it to date over this Russia business. They've gone all in on it. I mean, the level of risk that they have put up. It's not just that they have that they are, calling Putin a bad man. They have taken unprecedented actions. Seizing central bank funds, lopping Russia off SWIFT, compromising Swiss bank neutrality, um, reversing course on Nord Stream 2, which was a billion, billions of dollars down the drain. They have gone all in on this, all in, which means that they see it as an existential crisis. Now, I am not like I'm not going to say like I'm quote pro Russia like some people are, but I do in my heart of hearts hope that they fail in those endeavors, because if they succeed, it's going to be so bad for us. But even if they fail, it's still going to be bad, because they're like a wild beast lashing out at the moment. So we have to be a bit careful. They're going to get more censorious. They're going to get more draconian. They're going to become more totalitarian in the short term. So we have to just kind of carry on doing what we're doing, but also try, like even more than usual, try to keep the eye of Sauron from looking at us, because they're in a strange place right now. But we have to see what happens. If there's a chance that they won't be able to weather this, but my instincts tells me that they've actually strengthened their position in the short term. So, yep.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on Ukraine. I mean, I've recently been invited to speak at NatCon, and I went to Brussels, and it's an interesting conference. I'm very happy. I'm very surprised I got to speak there because I have a bit of a different angle. But it went well. Met a lot of young, interesting, very smart, very based people, and a lot of people who are more kind of a Eurocrat types. And it seemed to be that pretty much everything was on the table there. I mean, if I could have my anti-liberalism speech there, there's that was one thing that you could question, but the position on Ukraine was always, you almost had to kind of explain that we all owe a debt of gratitude to hero of the people Zelensky, and all of that stuff before you made any sort of point related to that. And I am not pro Russia. I am Russia is my neighbor here. They're knocking at my door. My ancestors were persecuted by the Russians. The Red Army went for our villages. We profoundly hate the Russians. But the idea that this is just some madman waking up one morning and saying, "I want to conquer Europe," and that we should go to nuclear war for this. That's a very different thing, and I don't think that should be a foregone conclusion, because that's the right side of history. So it did feel to me like, okay, it's incredible how fast this type of stuff happens as well. Like the narrative is not set for a week or two, but then it's very clear what the narrative is, and that even people on our side are just not everyone actually. There was a little bit of maybe we should think about it, but it was very much pushed back on, and it was people were almost outraged that that was even on the table, that opinion that we might think about it. It is a bit disheartening, because on the one hand I'm happy that people are opening up to post liberal thought or whatever I tend to represent, but at the same time, like you said, there's a lot of ways to contain. Maybe post liberalism is another thing that once they want to bring into the bigger tent to tame and contain. I personally don't want to be the instrument to have that done, but I don't know. I don't know how much thought is in this. How I don't know, top down this all is. I'm still very confused about it. But Ukraine, the narrative on Ukraine, like I said, seemed to be pretty much set.
Yeah, and one of the people always told me, if you have low expectations, you will never be disappointed. But it feels to me that it doesn't matter how low my expectations of humanity are, I'm still so disappointed. They never stop disappointing me. And one of the things that gets me about this is that their trick is always the same. It's always the same play. Find a guy, label him Hitler, rally the troops. Like, didn't we live through Iraq? I mean, we've been through this so many times. They did it with Assad in Syria. They did it with Gaddafi, and it works every time. It's like, how many times are, and some people say things like, well, the trouble is that the right is just stupid, right? The right they'll just always be tricked by the same play. And I hate to say it, but I'm coming to just the same conclusion. There's like, what hope is there? Like, they never learn. They never ever learn. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what there is to say at this point, other than you have to keep yourself sane, and increasingly the things I look to are just the things of normal life. My daughter going to nice parks, sunny days, because if you obsess about these things too much, the bleakness of it all has got the capacity, I think, to to start affecting your like well-being. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I completely, yeah, I see where you're coming from. I'm probably a bit more at the start of my journey being on the internet and talking about these things. I still have some spunk left in me, or whatever, some spark, and in the sense that I'm still hopeful, because things seem to be changing very fast in many ways. Some things seem to not be changing at all. Some things seem to be getting worse. So yeah, the landscape is dynamic, if nothing else, and very unpredictable, which can work in favor of of us or our enemies, depending on what.
I mean, in the okay, without to try to end on a more like helpful, on a more hopeful and helpful note, I suppose. The very fact that me and you are having this conversation, coming from the sorts of backgrounds that we come from, the fact that you're a woman having this sort of conversation, um, this wouldn't have happened 5 years ago. This conversation, um, so slowly but surely, there is something happening. There is like the stirrings of this fight back are there. It's just that we need to learn very quickly from the failings, I think, of Trump, um, and from populism. I've got a book coming out soon, which is like a version of the Foundations of Politics course. It's called the Populist Delusion, um, and I think the important thing for us is not to waste time on things that have been proven to not work in the past. Focus on those things that do, like, either start doing those things that do work, but also, like, I mean, we can hope that Trump, for example, okay, may have learned from his experience to date. I don't know if there's much evidence of that, because he should be organizing right now. He should be like, all of like the vanguard and so on should be coming from, like, he has a network, he has resources, he has like a whole machine behind him. And yet, I mean, last time I saw him, he was he was tweeting about getting a hole in one in golf. So I mean, maybe Trump will never change, but you'd like to think that if populists are allowed to get into power again anywhere, that they will learn from what's happened and immediately get to work from day one, doing the things that actually matter, which isn't tweeting. It isn't like, effectively shouting at the system. It's like, you've got to put your people in power. You have to fire the opposition in any position of power whatsoever. Fucking just fire them, you know? Um, you have to be as ruthless as the enemy have been, and to see them as enemies,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah, and believe you have the right to rule, which is almost no one has, and that's the thing. They still buy into the boomer truth regime. Yeah, they feel like the it's just gone a little bit too boomery, but they still believe the same ideas. Who are the real racists? We need to find out. If we don't step away from that framing, there really is no solution on the right.
yeah, I mean, if Trump and his friends haven't woken up by now, right? We sat and watched the Supreme Court tell Texas and 20, was it 17 other states that they have no standing, right? They have no standing because they have concerns over the election integrity, right? If the boomers don't see now that the US Constitution isn't going to save them, and that the legal system is not this be all and end all, right? There is there is no hope. I don't know. Vox Day talks about the day of the pillow, right? Which is like the day that the last boomer dies. But I mean, I don't want to be too hard on the boomers, because they were also very vocal against lockdowns and so on, and are some of the most vocal and organized people, actually, at the rallies and things. It's just like, if like only we could channel that energy they have into something productive, rather than like standing with placards, because that's useless. Just do something that matters. And there are stirring. I mean, in America, the stuff around the parents organizing to push back against CRT, for example, has been positive, right? I see that guy in Florida, was it DeSantis?
DeSantis.
Yeah, he seems to be acting in a way that suggests that he's learnt a little bit from the mistakes of the Trump era. So there are signs of hope in America, and in Europe. I'm a little bit more doomy about the UK because the Tory party, I mean, they've been in power for 11 years now. There's no sign of any flanking from the right. I don't know what Nigel Farage is doing. It's just hope. It's just hope. I mean, just today, one of the most conservative MPs, Michael, the most Brexity, what's his name, Michael Fabricant, the guy who's got like a kind of like wig hair, that guy. He was tweeting, congratulating, the first openly transgender MP who obviously is a Tory, right? I mean, it's just it's so hopeless. So the UK is the most dire place. Also, I don't know if you've seen, Zelensky did rankings the other day of who the greatest friends of Ukraine are, and of course the UK was top of the list. So it's just like there is no. It's like we're in pause central here in the UK, and there's. I honestly think we're the like even if the pause falls, it's like London and the UK will be like the final kind of frontier of it, the last holdout. So, I would if I was single, I'd move, but I've got a wife and a daughter, so you have to. I'm gonna have to grind it out. I'm afraid.
Yeah, I mean, there's only a limited places left to move because the pause is everywhere. It really is, and for me, living in London was probably the most practical red pill / black pill that I've had, because London is the aggregator of millions of strivers from around Europe. Who essentially have the same worldview, obviously, because they're all competing to outstrive each other in the great metropole. So yeah, it's a cauldron of these ideas, and people fight each other onto who's the most who's the most paused. So yeah, it's a scary place.
If you don't mind me asking, where are you now? Where are you?
I live in Romania now. Yeah.
So you've actively chose to move from London to Romania.
Yeah, the second world. Yeah, exactly.
That's
Um,
that's interesting, because I have this theory that if we do live in this bipolar world coming up, that the new Iron Curtain is going to be the other way around. Like the old Iron Curtain, like people wanted to move from Eastern Europe and from Russia into the West. I've got this vision, like in a few years' time, where it's going to be like me and Charlemagne and Aaron McIntyre and friends trying to get over the new Berlin Wall in Ukraine. We're trying to escape into Moscow.
I hope so. I mean, these areas have been underdeveloped for a long time for many reasons. Obviously corruption, all sorts of issues. They're getting better, but at the same time, the pause is everywhere. Like the same mindset, and also, I mean, Romania is a kind of a special place. Poland and Hungary have different kind of internal coherence, like ethnic internal coherence, that we don't have here in Romania. We're very much looking to Brussels in many ways, and our elites especially are looking to Brussels. So, yeah, it's very very fast. The Europeanization of Romania is happening fast. The cities, obviously, the rural place, that's fairly medieval still, but the difference between rural people and city people is huge, and yeah, they're very much they're very woke in the cities here.
I don't want to keep you. I don't want to keep you too long, but does the experience of communism not like moderate that away or mediate it in some way? That's what people always say about Poland. It's like, well, these guys lived under communism and they know it sucks, so they don't want to go back there. Does that
Yeah,
not have like some moderating effect?
they don't see it as communism. They see it as free market, the European Union, that's the West, that's, technocracy is seen as a very good thing here still. It's like the idea that you can apply management principles to politics, compared to the corrupt workings of, tribal politics here. It's seen as a step up. And in many ways, it has been, because Europe kind of has pulled us out of a lot of corrupt practices just by the simple fact that there is some sort of oversight on what's happening. They've introduced other corrupt practices. Obviously, they have their clients here as well, but they're less visible to people. So we really do think that people have made a step up. So no, also, I mean, I was 2 years old when they shot Ceausescu. I barely remember what it was like. I remember transition, which was, still kind of shitty, but at least the borders were open and, you could go buy chocolate in I don't know, Hungary or East Germany or something. And that was really interesting. And then at this time, I mean, this is, we have a relatively okay functioning market system. Um, yeah, I mean, people are more prosperous. Everything's getting more expensive again. People are feeling like inflation's being felt really hard right now. But I think very few people have an explanatory framework over what's happening, and how that ties into Europe. And, it's very much like, for example, a lot of people get their news from like the AP or Reuters here. They know, Putin's a bad man. So if prices go up, Putin's to blame. There's not that much theory around it. And that's kind of my main problem with this is that people tend to see history and then draw very bad conclusions depending on who rules them. And I feel like people really don't understand the lessons of communism in that context. I mean, you would need to read someone like Richard Legutko to understand, why this is like that. For us, it's these are two very separate things, and one is good and one is bad because one is from Europe, where all the chocolate lives or whatever the products and the progress, the technology, and one is from Russia, which is very bad. So that's about I feel like, kind of the instinctive level of what people think about here.
No, so again, sorry to keep you, but
No, you're not keeping me.
how many like Africans and Muslims have started turning up in Romania? Has that started yet?
No, we have a few students because Romanian universities are very corrupt. So we hand out medical degrees like candy for, I don't know, $5,000 a year or something. So we have a few of those, but no, it's just not an attractive. The word hasn't gone out about the new Iron Curtain yet. But if it will happen, I think we're going to have those problems. I mean, or those opportunities soon.
All right, great.
Yeah. I don't want to let you go before I ask you the question of the show. Everyone gets asked this question. I know you probably will have a lot of answers to this, but whatever is off the top of your head, do you have a subversive thinker, a writer, could be an artist, anyone living or dead, you think is underrated and that people should read more of or check out?
A subversive one.
Subversive thinker in the spirit of the show, not necessarily in the spirit of, I don't know, McCarthy or something. So yes, nowadays subversive.
I have to think about that. When you say subversive, do you mean somebody from the right or do you mean somebody from the left?
Oh, somebody from the right in this case, or could be somebody from. I mean, you've cited Michel Foucault as an inspiration. A lefty. He's pretty subversive.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, there are so many interesting people to read. Let me try to keep it brief. Let me see how many I can name. I'll just name a load of them, and then people can do what they usually do, which is they come back to me and said, "Listen, academic Asian, because of you, I've spent like £500 on books in the past, and I'm never going to read them all." But Samuel T. Francis is a very good thinker. He wrote a book called Leviathan and Its Enemies, which is a little bit dry, but it's for me one of the best books on elite theory written in the past, 2 decades or something like that. He's dead now, but he's got lots of other very interesting books. He's got a book on race. He's got a book which is a collection of essays. He's got a book called Beautiful Losers, talking about like the failures of the American right. He's got a book called Shots Fired. And he is someone who was decades ahead of his time. Like, he recognized what was happening in the culture back in like the 80s. He's got a marvelous essay on Martin Luther King Day and how that was instituted and the truth behind Martin Luther King. And I mean, just the insight that, Christmas, that's up for grabs. You can play political football with that, but everybody talks about Martin Luther King Day with a sacred reverence. Nobody doesn't understand what Martin Luther King Day is about in America. So that is he's a really good prose stylist, and that's a searing essay, that one, if you can find it. So Sam Francis is definitely one I would recommend. I tell you who has a lot of interesting material that you don't necessarily have to agree with his worldview, because he is associated with kind of harder right groups, but he has a lot of very interesting books, and that is Kerry Bolton. Kerry Bolton's got a book on the decline and fall of civilizations. He's got one called Revolution from Above, where he points out all of the kind of financing and Washington groups involved in Bolshevism, involved in all sorts of left wing groups throughout history. And this is like one of the biggest things that you start to realize. Thomas 777 is the same, showing that the force of the pause was never Moscow. That was like a Cold War CIA lie in a way. The source of the pause was always Washington. They really pushed it. So Kerry Bolton is good for that. He's just had a book out recently called, hold on, I've got it here. I forget the name of it. Hold on. It's called
The Clear Them Out Man.
No. No. That is Jonathan. Clear Them Out Man is Jonathan Bowden, who died.
Okay.
He died 10 years ago.
Okay.
But you should watch all of his lectures, all of them. Every single one that you can find, because that's an education in itself. But yeah, Kerry Bolton's most recent book was called The Perversion of Normality. A very good press is Imperium Press. Do you know if you're familiar with them?
Yeah.
They publish a lot of very interesting books that I would recommend checking out, and buy directly from their site as well, rather than through Amazon if you can. Is that enough? I can
Yeah,
keep on
no,
going.
of course. I usually ask for one, but this is plenty. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it depends which way you want to go. Someone I found a very interesting person to read was Julius Evola. Evola is interesting because he turns the progressive view of history on its head and says, actually, we're in this entropic, we're in this kind of decline, and we've been in decline for a very long time. And how he kind of frames things and sees things, and the importance that he gives to transcendence, gives a kind of spiritual element to the analysis that is sometimes missing in somebody like Moldbug. Moldbug has the entropy, right? He's got the logic down quite well. But I feel like he doesn't always get to the root of the issue, which I often find a bit surprising, because Moldbug also read Carlyle. Like, Carlyle was a massive influence on Moldbug. But I mean, when I spoke to Moldbug, I asked him, like, how come this spiritual element, like, how come you didn't take that from like, that's the most important part of Carlyle. I can't remember what his answer was now, but so I do think that the spiritual, the perennial traditionalist thinkers like Carlyle, Evola, Guinon, are worth reading. Although I remain trapped in my kind of cynical kind of Gen X millennial. I struggle to find like faith myself. but I recognize the deep importance of it. I think Carlyle said the most important thing about a man is his religion. And just reconnecting with this way of thinking, which again was natural and normal for centuries, is something that we should all do, um, especially as we're about to hit harder times. You need to like be able to steel yourself against the ashes of civilization, and people like Evola will help you on that journey. I think to find the inner steel, to be a man among the ruins, to ride the tiger, as he says. So he's another very important thinker as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Another point where I mirror you. I've found my faith, some of it. It is very hard, to be honest. After I've been, steeped in like millennial nihilism for a very long time. Yeah, to have epiphany. I completely understand. Why I should have faith. Um, how what's the mechanics of it, and I think Moldbug is probably the same. I think like at heart he's a bit of a Bay Area rationalist type, a Robin Hanson with more, I guess, courage to read weird literature. So yeah, he's yeah. I think there's probably many people like this now. I feel like some of them are in my audience. They write to me sometimes and they ask me like, so how do you do it? And I'm like, you tell me when you discover it. Um, anyway, this was very fun. Thank you so much for coming on. If it's dark, it's dark. It's this is the nature of honest conversation. I think there are some white pills in there as well. And I want to point people towards the courses that you offer, towards your YouTube channel. So if you could just let us know all the links, I'll put them in the show notes. But also, yeah, maybe if people remember them audio visually, it helps.
You can find me on YouTube at Academic Agent. Just search for it; I'll come up. I think currently I've got my avatar is George Sanders from originally from the film All About Eve, but over time people make memes and things, and it kind of morphed. But I think it's currently like George Sanders as Franco at the moment. So you'll find me there on YouTube. But the main way I make my living now is selling courses through the academic agency, and the courses I write on there, because I want to offer people something that they're just not going to get in universities, no matter how much money they pay. Um, so I've got Foundations of Economics, which is like a pure Austrian course. I've got the Trivium, which is logic, um, writing and grammar, and rhetoric. Trivium was taught for hundreds of years to generation after generation of kids, and then at some point they just stopped teaching it in our schools. This was like 12-year-olds were expected to do the Trivium. Now adults struggle with basic logic, grammar, and just even knowing the skills of rhetoric. I've even got a theory that they stopped teaching the Trivium because if the population was equipped with those skills, they'd never get away with the stuff that they do. Right? If you had basic training in those three areas, I mean, writing, for example, clear writing is connected with clear thinking. If you're able to express yourself in plain English, it clears out a lot of, and the left get away with a lot of things through language games and through obscuring their true intentions by playing with words. But of course, if you have training in how to spot those things, they'd never get away with it. So the Trivium is another big one. Probably my best-selling course, actually. And then recently, I released this Foundations of Politics, which, as far as I'm aware, is the only course like that in the world, which is just pure elite theory. I start with Mosca, I end with Sam Francis, and we look at Pareto, Michel's, Carl Schmitt, who else did Juvenal, fantastic thinker, Juvenal, James Burnham, and Gottfried. Sorry, it ends not with Sam Francis, but with Paul Gottfried, who you should interview, by the way, if you haven't
Yes,
already.
he's on my short list. I'm
Yeah, I
trying
can
to.
send him your email if you want. Yeah.
Oh, really? Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please
All right.
do. Awesome. Yeah, please do go there. Please buy Foundations of Politics, the Trivium, and all of these courses. This is a lot of, this is crystallized knowledge that you've acquired after going through, the usual channels and finding them wanting, which I think a lot of people can use. So, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh,
And
I should mention. Sorry, I should.
yes,
I'm also on Substack. I should remember because you're on Substack, aren't you?
yes, I am.
That's your main platform. I'm on there as well. I have it's mainly subscriber only because I get into some stuff on there that I can't talk about on YouTube. But it's called the Forbidden Text. But if you search academic agent on Substack, I have a completely separate thing on there where I talk a bit more in depth than I can in streams and videos on YouTube. So yeah, at one point I was the number one in the world in the category of politics and terrorism.
Oh, really?
I'm not there anymore because I didn't like the word terrorism, so I took myself out of that category. So, but yeah, that was funny.
That's an interesting one. Are these two separate categories, or is there a category called politics and
No,
terrorism?
it's literally called I think it's called like politics, terrorism, and political theory or something, some weird category like that. So anyway.
Well, yes, please do investigate what's going on with the AA Substack. The Forbidden Text, is it?
The Forbidden Text, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. Thank you again for coming on. This was really fun, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Great. Yeah, I should have you on. You should come on my channel at some point.
Okay. Sure.